If you're over 60 and you're tired all the time, it's not just aging. It's often 10 daily habits that quietly drain your energy every single day. And number 7 is the one most people defend, while it's destroying their sleep. Let's start with the first mistake, because it's the fastest way to feel older overnight. Today, I want to share 10 habits that quietly steal your energy after 60. Not all at once, not dramatically, just a little every day, until one morning you wake up and wonder where your strength went. The good news is this: most of these things can be changed. You don't need expensive medications. You don't need extreme workouts. And you don't need to become 20 years younger. Sometimes all you have to do is stop doing the things that are working against you. Stop what hurts. Replace it with something better. Simple, but powerful. And before we begin, I'd like to ask you something. If you're over 60 years old, leave the number 60 in the comments below. I'd love to know how many people are walking this stage of life alongside me. Now let's start with the first mistake. It's one I made myself for many years, and I had no idea it was draining my energy. Every morning I would sit at the kitchen table with a sweet pastry, a slice of white bread, and a large cup of coffee. First, I felt wonderful, alert, awake, ready for the day. But about 30 minutes later, something changed. My energy crashed. I felt sluggish, foggy, and strangely tired. Back then, I blamed my age. I thought that was simply what getting older felt like. But I was wrong. Years later, I learned what was really happening. My blood sugar was shooting up, and then falling just as quickly. My body wasn't running out of energy. It was riding a roller coaster every morning. So I changed my breakfast. Nothing dramatic, just a little more protein, some eggs, a bowl of yogurt, a handful of nuts, and a glass of water before my coffee. The difference surprised me. I felt steadier, clearer, more alive. That's when I learned something important. Many people think they're getting old, when in reality they're just starting the day the wrong way. And that brings me to the second mistake, one that became part of my life after retirement. I spent hours sitting in the same chair beside my window, watching the street, watching the birds, watching the world move while I stayed still. I told myself I was resting. After all, hadn't I earned it? But something strange happened. The more I rested, the more tired I became. My legs felt heavy, my body felt stiff, and my energy seemed to disappear for no reason. Eventually, I realized the problem wasn't age. It was movement, or rather, the lack of it. As we grow older, circulation slows down when we sit too long. The body becomes quieter, and so does our energy. Now I make a simple rule for myself. Every 30 to 45 minutes I stand up. I walk a little, even if it's only for a few minutes. And it helps more than most people realize. Because here's a truth that took me years to understand. The human body begins to age fastest when it stops moving. And speaking of simple things that quietly drain your strength, the third mistake surprised me more than any of the others. For years, I drank coffee all day long. 1 cup in the morning, another after lunch, sometimes a third in the afternoon. And yet I was always tired. I woke up with headaches. I felt dizzy when I stood too quickly. Some days I couldn't understand why my body felt so heavy. I assumed it was age. What else could it be? Then one day my doctor looked at me and said something I'll never forget. You don't have an energy problem. You have a water problem. I laughed when he said it, but he was right. For years, I thought my body was slowly giving up on me. That was the frightening part. Not because I was sick, not because I was old, but because I had started believing exhaustion was who I was. I wasn't running on coffee. I was running on dehydration. Now, before my first cup of coffee, I drink water. Every single morning. And the difference is remarkable. Because sometimes mild dehydration is enough to make you feel older than you really are. And that leads to the fourth mistake. One I ignored for far too many years. Eating dinner too late. For a long time, I didn't sit down to eat until after 8 o'clock. Sometimes even later. It seemed harmless. But night after night, my sleep became lighter. I tossed and turned. I woke up exhausted. And every morning felt like I had been fighting a battle while I slept. Eventually, I realized something important. Good sleep doesn't begin when your head touches the pillow. It begins at the dinner table. So I started eating earlier. A little lighter. A little simpler. And my sleep slowly improved. Because an aging body doesn't need more food. It needs more recovery. Now there's one more habit that quietly steals rest from millions of people. And I almost fell into the same trap myself. Looking at a phone before bed. First, it was only a few minutes. Just checking the news. Reading a message. Watching one short video. But somehow, a few minutes became an hour. And by the time I put the phone down, my mind was crowded. Too many headlines. Too many opinions. Too much noise. These days, I choose something different. A book. Soft music. Sometimes a relaxing audio before sleep. And my evenings feel calmer because of it. You see, not every sleep problem comes from getting older. Sometimes the thing stealing your sleep isn't age at all. Sometimes it's the phone in your hand. And that brings me to another mistake that many of us carry for years without even noticing. Treating stress as if it's normal. For most of my life, I carried everything. The family, the children, the bills, the worries nobody else wanted to think about. I told myself that was what strong people did. I kept going, kept smiling, kept saying, I'm fine, even when I wasn't. What I didn't understand was that stress always sends a bill. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually the body pays the price. The saddest part? I thought I was sacrificing myself for the people I loved. Years later, I realized they never asked me to carry all of it alone. Mine certainly did. The fatigue, the tension, the sleepless nights. They weren't signs of weakness. They were signs that I had been carrying too much for too long. These days, I do something much simpler. A short walk. A few minutes of slow breathing. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to remind my body that it's safe. Because here's a lesson age taught me the hard way. You can fool your mind, but your body keeps the score. And speaking of things that quietly throw the body out of balance, let's talk about food. There was a time when I skipped breakfast almost every day. I was busy, or I simply wasn't hungry. Then by late afternoon, I would eat far too much. And afterward, I felt terrible. My energy would rise and crash. My mood would change. Some days I felt restless. Other days I felt exhausted. It took me years to understand that my body wasn't asking for more food. It was asking for consistency. Now I eat more regularly. Nothing complicated. Just smaller meals. A little more protein. A little less chaos. And life feels steadier because of it. Because old age loves rhythm. It does not love extremes. And that leads me to another truth that many people don't want to hear. You cannot expect a strong body if you never use it. A friend of mine was 72 when she said something that broke my heart. I don't have the strength to exercise anymore. When she said those words, I saw something in her eyes that scared me. Not weakness. Surrender. As if she had quietly decided that the strongest years of her life were already over. First, it sounded reasonable. But the truth was exactly the opposite. The less she moved, the weaker she became. The weaker she became, the less she moved. It was a cycle that kept feeding itself. Today, I don't think about exercise the way I once did. I think about movement. 10 minutes of walking. A short stroll after dinner. A few extra steps around the house. Small things. But small things add up. Because muscles are not just for strength. They are the savings account of old age. And every time you move your body, you're making another deposit. And that brings me to the 9th mistake. One so small that most people never notice it. Breathing too shallowly. For years, I lived in a constant state of worry. Not panic. Just quiet worry. The kind that follows you everywhere. My shoulders were always tight. My chest often felt heavy. And I carried a tension that never seemed to leave. I thought I was simply getting older. But one afternoon I noticed something. I was barely breathing. Not really. Just short little breaths. Enough to survive. But not enough to feel alive. So I started doing something simple. 2 minutes. That's all. A few slow, deep breaths every day. And gradually I felt calmer. Clearer. Less exhausted. That's when I learned an important truth. Sometimes what your body needs most isn't more coffee. It's more oxygen. And now we come to the final mistake. The biggest one of all. The most dangerous sentence I ever repeated to myself. I'm old. Just 3 words. I've heard people say those words at 60, at 65, sometimes even at 55. And every time they did, a part of them seemed to disappear. Not from their body, from their spirit. But those 3 words can steal years from your life. Because once you believe them, you stop trying. You stop improving. You stop asking questions. You stop looking for solutions. Every ache becomes normal. Every bad habit becomes acceptable. Every tired day becomes something you simply endure. But fatigue is not always a sign of age. Sometimes it's a message. A signal. Your body asking for help. Your body asking for change. And that's the difference. You don't need to become younger. You only need to stop doing the things that are making you exhausted. Looking back now, I don't regret getting older. Nobody escapes that. What I regret is how many years I spent accepting things that could have been changed. Years I can never get back. And before we finish, let's take a moment to look back. Today we talked about 10 habits. Stop starting your day with sugar and white carbohydrates. Stop sitting for hours without moving. Stop replacing water with coffee. Stop eating heavy meals late at night. Stop scrolling on your phone before bed. Stop treating stress as normal. Stop skipping meals and overeating later. Stop expecting health without movement. Stop breathing as if you're constantly worried. And finally, stop believing that feeling tired all the time is simply part of getting older. Because after 60, health is rarely built through one dramatic decision. It's built through small choices, repeated day after day, quietly, consistently. And over time, those small choices become the difference between merely growing older and truly living well. As I sit here now beside my window, the morning sunlight spilling across the floor, a warm cup of tea resting quietly in my hands, I find myself looking out at the garden and thinking about how much has changed. Not the world. Me. Today I am not younger than I was yesterday. My hair is still gray. My hands still tremble a little. And the years behind me are far greater than the years ahead. But something surprises me. I have more energy now than I had at 65. Not because I discovered some miracle. Not because I found a secret nobody else knows. But because I finally stopped doing the things that were quietly stealing my life. And perhaps that's the lesson I hope you'll remember after this video ends. If you've stayed with me until now, I'd love for you to write, "I choose better health," in the comments below. And tell me something else. Of the 10 habits we talked about today, which one will you stop starting tomorrow? Your story may help someone else who is struggling in silence. And if you enjoy these reflections on aging, I hope you'll subscribe and join us again. Because while none of us can become young again, we can choose to grow older with more energy, more wisdom, and a little more peace.